welcome to CTO Craft Bytes, and today we're going to be looking at the future of mobile applications. So if this is your first time at a CTO Craft Bytes, let me tell you a bit more about what CTO Craft does. So CTO Craft is a mentoring and coaching community for technology leaders around the world, focusing on supporting technologists in their leadership growth. Community members are over 7,000, and CTO Craft provides them with one-to-one coaching, mentoring groups, a curated Slack community, and events like this one. And I'd like to say a huge thanks to our partner Indiespring for helping us to make these Bytes events possible. So I am Zoe Cunningham. Hello, I'm a director at Softwire. Softwire is a bespoke design and development agency based in Kentish Town. And we've just been awarded the second best technology company to work for in the UK, which is very exciting. It's our highest score ever. I've worked for Softwire for over 20 years, and I get involved with all forms of software outreach, including, having obviously over 20 years, I've done lots of different roles. I started as a coder, but I now get involved in outreach, such as taking part in events like this and hosting the podcast. So today, Rob Sandbach, the managing director, Indiespring, is joining me. Rob, hello. Can I ask you to tell me a bit about yourself?
Sure. Hi, Zoe. Hi, everyone. Congratulations to Softwire on winning that award. That's fantastic. I'm MD and founder of Indiespring. Like yourself, started off as a developer coder in my first job. Very quickly, I think my boss didn't think I was very good at coding because I got moved to sales, which feels like a bit of an overreaction, but there we go. And then founded Indiespring, and we focus on mobile-first solutions for our clients in the UK. Very similar design and build, based in the UK, but clients all around the world. Based up in Manchester, and very proud partners of CTO Craft. Love what everyone's doing over here, and very, very proud to be involved with the whole community.
Community is just the opposite word, isn't it, for CTO Craft?
It is. Yeah, they've nailed that ability to have a safe space and get lots of people in one place. So absolutely thrilled to be part of it.
Fantastic. So I'd just like to remind everyone watching, if you have a question, please can you ask it in the Ask a Question link, which you can see below the video at the bottom of the screen. There is also a chat function. I don't have the skills to monitor both the chat and the Ask a Question at the same time. It's a bit next level for me. So if you've got a question, feel free to use the chat. But if there's something you want to ask Rob, please put it in the Ask a Question below, and I will be monitoring that. I'd also like to encourage you to ask your questions as soon as possible. If you have a question, please ask it. And we'll answer the questions as we go along. So I've got some questions for Rob, and to be fair, I can quite happily ask Rob questions all lunchtime. But I'd much rather make sure we're answering the questions that you want to hear about. So please do drop them in as when you think of them. So let's talk about the future of mobile applications.
Dangerous topic.
Well, I want to start on a slightly different tangent, perhaps the opposite of what you'd expect, because I think it's quite important to look at what is the past of mobile applications. So we're kind of talking about the future and how things are going to change, but where have we come from and what are we building on?
Sure. It's a great question. It's obviously been quite a fast-moving space, and you can go way back when you look at the start of this stuff to the earlier platforms in the 90s. But I think for the purposes of today's discussion, let's look to 2008. Apple launched the App Store, and finally third-party developers can build applications and deploy and release them through an authorized channel. And we all know the constraints and challenges around that channel, I think. But I think it's at that really that we got the ability to move beyond a mobile-first web experience and start to do things natively on devices, and obviously Android and others came and went since. Those early days, people were finding their feet, weren't they, in terms of what was possible. We had lots of cool widgety. I remember Carlsberg app where you could drink a pint from your phone and things like that. And it's been a very fast moving 13 years. especially in the early days, because the devices were still year on year changing. These days the pace of innovation has perhaps slowed a little bit, but earlier on, changes were coming thick and fast, and new paradigms were being defined, maybe on the Android side coming over to iOS, and then vice versa. And it was a very fast-moving environment, and we're going through that maturity curve. I think at the moment we're starting to get some consolidation, certainly around UI and front end of these applications, which is a nice place to be from a development perspective, because much like we had in the web in the early 2000s, we're not having to worry so much anymore about device specific stuff and trying to worry about IE6 versus Opera versus all these other things. And I think mobile is just getting over that curve as well a little bit, which sets us up nicely from a tech perspective for the future.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, funnily enough, that actually was going to be my next question, because I remember when I did work as a coder, I started in 2000, and it was that really exciting time of the internet taking off, and suddenly you could just build it once and it deploys through a browser and everyone gets the same experience. You don't have to build things multiple times for different platforms. And then the advent of mobile kind of reversed all of that. So it very much introduced this, which is the best platform to build your mobile application on. So what's your answer to that question? If you're a developer and you're building, do you pick a platform? Do you pick just Apple and Android? Do you use some kind of framework that you build in and deploys to multiple platforms? What's the best way to go about it?
I mean, in terms of platforms, I think certainly for the consumer space, the dominant two are iOS and Android. I think that race has been run as far as Microsoft are concerned. So yeah, I think that there is some other interesting stuff going on though. Ubuntu Touch is a really interesting alternative that we're seeing used internally in some businesses and so on. But yeah, I think in terms of device platforms, they're the two key ones that most people are going to be talking about if they're looking at deploying their apps to the consumer market, as it were. In terms of frameworks, it's such a great question, and we get asked it all the time. I'm going to dodge it. It really does depend on what the use case for the app is. I mean, we tend to think of apps in sort of 5 buckets. There, the first one is games. Well, we're seeing Unity sort of dominating that market and continues to, and we've got a large Unity team in house here that we do a lot of work with. We've got these widget kind of or dashboard apps. So an app that's essentially a UI layer that hits an API, post some data, retrieve some data, display some data, and that can be a myriad of different things, a SaaS solution or a calendar app or whatever. I think in those apps where the primary purpose of the app is display, you're seeing consolidation around the front end frameworks such as React Native, Flutter from Google now. We still do some work in Xamarin and Microsoft's new cross-platform framework, Maui. So they're the sort of names you're probably expecting to hear when people are talking about mobile apps. And as I say, for those applications where the primary purpose of the app is to be a UI layer onto a pretty standard, controller model type scenario, that's where we're seeing the market go. And then in terms of which of those platforms, you can get very quickly into a classic technology cult versus cult type discussion. We use React Native and Xamarin in-house. Some of our clients like the idea of .NET top to bottom and all in Azure and Microsoft supported, which is the use case we have for Xamarin. Others prefer the JavaScript open source type community stuff. So I won't get into that particular fight. But then there's some apps that still native's the way to go, particularly those that are something beyond that sort of grab display data type application, something that's using the device's features. So we do a lot of work in telematics, where we're using the Bluetooth radios on phones to know when someone's in a car, and GPS to track their location and then assess their driving and so on. You can do the UI in one of those platforms that I discussed, but you're still going to want to get relatively close to the metal in terms of native kind of coding and so on there, if you want to be using those features in anything other than a very simple standardized way. So yeah, it's part of the excitement, part of the challenge is maintaining a competency across these different platforms and frameworks. But we do see a variety, but different use cases for different tools, and we've tried to be quite pragmatic on that front.
A very diplomatic answer. And let me jump in. We've got our first question, which is fantastic. So
Brilliant.
Thank you very much to Mark Batty. And it's very closely related to what we were just discussing. So Mark's question is, how close are cross-platform frameworks to native development in terms of performance and access to OS-specific features? So that's a very interesting question.
It is, and they're pretty close, and they're getting closer. I think that the challenges are always, it's the lag behind the feature hitting the market, through being released to developers and the frameworks catching up and supporting them. They're getting faster at that, and especially if you're picking the larger frameworks, React Native, Flutter, those type of frameworks, they're pretty good now at keeping pace and getting access to those new OS features as and when they come through. In terms of performance, it depends what you're doing. We did a piece on this and did some performance profiling. I think if your use case for your app falls into the standard sort of 80%, the performance impact on, let's say, devices most common in sort of Western societies, more modern devices, capable devices, it's probably not going to be enough to deter you. Where we're seeing problems is on the cheaper devices in developing markets, or where you're doing something really quite different or funky. But these frameworks are good. You can still do those components or those calculations or whatever natively and pass the results back to the framework and so on. So if you know what you're doing, you can get around some of the performance impacts. The big challenge we still see is actually app size, which is, again, less of a concern here. It doesn't matter if the app's 50 plus megs before you've got going. It's very difficult, we're finding, to build a very slim, quick to download app in places where data is either scarce or expensive. That's where we're seeing a lot of challenges, because there's just a lot of packaging and padding that comes with these applications.
Great answer. Not quite, it depends, but
Yeah, a little bit more specific.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And actually, it leads on to my next question, which was, again, kind of tangentially related. So we're kind of talking about how things have changed since mobile platforms, since building for a mobile was first a thing, right? And how, because one thing is that the software has developed, and a lot of these frameworks didn't even exist, so they weren't a choice at the start. But as well as the software developing, the hardware has also developed I'm trying to do 22 minus 8 in my head quickly, in 14 years. Sure enough, there she is. So how have these evolutions in hardware impacted on the development of mobile applications?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because we went through a period where we had lots of different devices and sizes and form factors and notches and all sorts, and we seem to have landed on a rectangle that's roughly this aspect ratio, and it might be like this or like this, and you can use it like that or like that. So on the one hand, that's a positive. But on the other hand, we're still trying, and the market's still trying, particularly on the Android side of things, with Samsung and so on, foldable phones and things like that, doing really cool, interesting stuff. And I think it's ever the challenge of people in our profession is to look at those and think, right, which ones of those are going to take off? Which one of the foldable devices that are likely to succeed and be popular? And is it worth putting the engineering development effort into supporting and ensuring that an experience is consistent there? Because of course we'd love to, but realistically there's an opportunity cost in reworking the UI to work on an oval phone versus a rectangular one. So I think from a phone perspective, at the moment we generally think in terms of conforming to the various UI recommendations of Apple and Google to get around things like notches and screen sizes, and also to access all the accessibility side of stuff. But generally, we're thinking in that rectangular form factor and keeping an eye on some of the other more exciting stuff and seeing what happens. where things get more interesting is when you think outside of just phones. So one of the big things we're looking at as we look forward to the future is viewing mobile applications outside the context of just the phone or just the tablet, and starting to think about, take Apple CarPlay or Google Auto. That we're now at the stage where most cars coming out of the factories now have these things installed, and so how do we develop interfaces for those form factors, and how do we need to consider when someone's driving how they interact with an application? And as I say, we do some work in telematics in the learner driver and new driver space, and they're pertinent questions because you don't really want much interaction while someone's driving, especially a new or learner driver. So yeah, that's where things get really interesting when you broaden the scope of the discussion from phones to mobile applications. Might not be the right word anymore, but it's those cross-platform experiences. I mean, Apple is the largest watch manufacturer and seller in the world now, which is mind-blowing when you think about it. They sell more than, I think it's more than the entire Swiss watch industry combined. So how do we interface on a screen that's the size of a postage stamp? It doesn't feel like the voice interactions are quite there yet. So yeah, really interesting stuff.
Much as we all want to go, like, hello, can you hit, into our watch? That's definitely what I want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got an anecdote about that. My dad went and bought a watch, but said I'll only pay for it if I can pay for it with the watch. So ended up essentially getting the staff member to onboard him, and then paid for the watch with the watch, which was all very meta. But yeah, it's an interesting space. It really is.
All right, so let's think about a slightly different angle. So mobiles have gone from being and talking about watches is quite apposite as well for this question, because watches are not quite yet mainstream. You can't guarantee that everyone will have a watch, and that was the case at the start with mobile. A few people would have an iPhone, maybe a few people would have. I actually had a Google phone with a built-in keyboard. I don't know if you remember that phone. I was this is the future, but how wrong was I?
Well,
and so we're now at the point where you can pretty much guarantee everyone has a mobile, in almost all cases. So who are the audiences for most mobile applications? Because some mobile applications need to reach everyone, and some, is that the usual case, or are there actually more applications with more specific audiences?
Yeah, it's a great question, and you get back to why are you building the mobile application. So a lot of apps that are released, and there's about 1,000 a day now are released, are purely about allowing a user to access a service, be that an online or a physical one, at their convenience. So Amazon's app might be a good example. It doesn't do anything more or less really than the Amazon website does, but clearly it's beneficial to Amazon to allow you to access their service through your phone. And looked at in that lens, what does a mobile app allow you to do? Address a much larger audience. As you mentioned, Zoe, like most people now have a phone in their pocket and are capable of using it to download an app and then interact with it. So I think a lot of brands come with just that approach in mind, that the reason we need an app is it lets people interact with us on their terms where they want to, and that's great. There are a bunch, as you alluded to, a bunch of other audiences that we see increasingly, and one of the big ones for us is deploying things internally into back of house for organizations, which is a lot less sexy, a lot less cool, a lot less exciting from a big launch marketing kind of aspect, but actually can be very transformative, and specifically in the replacing of these custom old devices that the example I'm thinking of is a logistics partner of ours. They write software for warehouses, so they have to buy these very specific scanning units that are very expensive, multiple thousands of pounds each, that are programmed and developed specifically to scan items, respond to a server, and all that kind of stuff. Well, there's a real opportunity for them, particularly in Black Friday and the Christmas periods when they need to scale up their staff massively, to accept that an Android device with a custom-built app on that isn't going to be as good as the perfectly designed solution they may have already, but is a fraction of the price. And so we're seeing lots of requests now come in for applications like that, scanning data entry, collecting interview feedback. They're just a few that I can think of. So whether you're replacing a clipboard and a pen, or you're replacing a £10,000 custom device that obviously is a large sunk cost, there's a real opportunity within businesses at the moment to use mobile to help back of house. And we don't hear about it so much. There's not a big song and a dance, but this is where I think a lot of the transformational stuff's happening outside of the public eye, and Android in particular, but iOS and Apple are embracing it more and more. People may be aware Apple have just announced unlisted App Store apps. So effectively, previously, if you wanted to deploy apps onto an unknown device, if someone can walk up and use your app, you needed to go through the App Store. It needed to conform to all their consumer guidelines. It needed a privacy statement, screenshots, and all that kind of stuff. And there were rules and so on. Well, they've just announced that a lot of that still applies, but the app doesn't need to be listed in the App Store anymore. You can just link to it. And suddenly that allows SMEs and businesses that can't afford a bespoke enterprise license from Apple, but do just want to offer an application to their employees or their customers or their suppliers, and they can do that. And I think that's one of the things looking forward, that we see more and more requests around we still get, we get startups, we get people come and say, I've got this product here, I'd like it on mobile. But more and more, it's about actually the more, it's a bit of a buzzword, but the more transformational stuff around, we've got this paper-driven process, can we use an app for that, or can we replace these expensive devices? So that's another example of an audience that might not immediately spring to mind, but we see as certainly a growing one as we move forward.
Yeah, and it's very interesting to consider, isn't it? Because I think consumer tech kind of gets the news so much more than business tech. But if you think about, even how our own lives are spent, in terms of hours at work versus hours not at work, and certainly where the revenue and the GDP of the country is coming from in terms of business, that actually is the key. The key areas or the key applications where technology can really transform, like you say, how we operate versus just adding something nice on the top.
Yeah, absolutely, and we're seeing that, and I think clearly that I'll use the P word. The pandemic has accelerated some of those shifts, particularly the offline to online type ones. But even before and around that, the opportunities presented by Raspberry Pi did it for desktop computing, and there are various other attempts to do that on the mobile space, but. If you can make that access to that kind of technology affordable, and certainly more affordable than the alternatives, that's when you see the adoption and the efficiencies that you're talking about. And I think previously Apple in particular have been very resistant to that. It's, as I mentioned, you had to get an enterprise license, you had to set up server infrastructure just to allow people to install an app that you'd built. I think they're coming around to the idea that apps can expand beyond just the consumer tech stuff that you were talking to.
Well, and they must have been losing market share, right? If you're looking at a solution and you're saying, well, with possibly even investing in handsets for your employees, and they're like, well, we're going to have to go with Android because Apple's too much hassle. I think it kind of reflects, I think, the way the industry is going. Apple's decision to do that is a reflection of what's happening.
It does. I mean, they've always enjoyed the benefits of a walled garden, for better and for worse. But I think there's some political pressure there as well that's coming down. That's the other thing as you look forward. I think the draconian rules around what can and can't go in, and how you can and can't compete with the app sort of service providers. I think we can expect that to move pretty quickly in the coming years as we look forward.
Super interesting. Right, I'm going to take some questions from the audience.
Sure.
So we've got another question from Mark. So with CI/CD and the big difference in review times between Apple and Google as a consideration, how do you, if at all, plan or schedule time releases? So this is very much pragmatic, like how
No,
do
it's a
you use
great
it?
one. Yeah, with Apple, it's really difficult because it can vary so much. I wish we had the silver bullet. So, yeah, I mean, you sort of with experience. I know it's a bit of a cop out. With experience, you can sort of get rid of the gotchas and the own goals in terms of things that they'll look at. But there is still, it's embarrassing to say this at this stage, sort of 14 years in, but there's still a bit of reviewer roulette. Whoever happens to be looking at your app on that day will pick up on something that the previous 50 releases no one's ever talked about. So I think on our side, I wish we had the answer around that. Certainly internally, there's lots of great CI/CD stuff, as Mark mentions there, around getting deployments across the team, internal testing completed, user acceptance testing, all that stuff is quite a mature ecosystem now. It's that last piece, particularly with Apple, particularly with a new app, that we just have to advise to our customers and clients. It can take any number of weeks. I mean, typically we're seeing 2 to 4 at the moment for a new application, and that normally includes a bounce or 2 back around something. But yeah, it's a problem, but it's much better with updates. I would say that what we found, once the first release goes in, the update turnarounds are much quicker and much less susceptible to that sort of reviewer roulette that we talked about earlier. That generally goes through in a day or two. It's the new apps that can be a real challenge.
So interesting. My engineer mindset immediately goes, okay, so could I use that to like break the Apple system by uploading? But there's probably something, isn't there, checking like that it's functionally similar to the previous one, and if it is, then it's just
yeah, you can do that. You can put a very early beta in, but you'll just get rejected on the basis that it's not a complete product. And
right.
Yeah, I mean, it's these pragmatic details that make it, let's say, exciting to be in this space.
Still exciting after 14 years.
Absolutely.
And another question on testing. So again, a very great specific question about what percentage of testing do you do on local physical devices compared to device farms and or virtual devices? So again, options that we now have that we didn't used to have, but how, and obviously can save a vast amount of time, but are they good enough? And yeah, how much testing do you do on real devices?
Great question. And again, the boring answer is it depends, but I'll try and add a bit more flesh to that. So for the UI based stuff, the automated tools are really useful, as people know from the web side of things. The challenge is a lot of the apps we're doing fall into the sort of fourth bucket of the apps are doing something that you can only do using mobile hardware or features of a mobile device. So take the telematics apps that I mentioned before. The only way we can test that telemetry is working properly is to physically go to a car and drive in circles and check that when we swap between mast towers, the telemetry passes over, and check that a bunch of other things. So if I would say if your app falls into that dashboard category of primarily we address a server, we retrieve some data, we display it on a dashboard, then the automated solutions and the device farms and that kind of environment is absolutely fit for purpose. The challenge, of course, I'll add a footnote to that. The challenge is that new devices get released every day. So as foldable phone number 7 hits the market, how do you check? It's not just about the builds that are in the development process now. It's also about the live released version. Or are you staying proactively on top of that assurance side of things? And that's something we work very hard to do on our side with our clients. And we're still at the stage where we'll go to the shop, pick up the device, and work through a test script. And frankly, I think it's a bit. We have to remember we're an app agency, so people come to us because they've got normally a very specific requirement, or there's a very compelling reason that they want to use an experienced agency. So the apps that we build perhaps aren't typical of the 1,000 a day that are hitting the App Store, but in our use cases, we still maintain a device library of something like 100 devices, and we still sort of manually do a lot of manual testing across them.
What does it take for you to decommission a device off your list? When do you say, oh, actually, do you know what? They still exist, but not enough people are using them.
Yeah, I mean, I love it. I thought we'd be getting into like what will the future of apps be in 20 years, but we've got some wonderful, more
We've
pragmatic
got
ones.
loads of time for that,
I love
loads
it.
of time.
So we try and maintain a percentage share of devices that represent a minimum of 98% for iOS and 95% for Android in our customers' target markets. So when we did some work with Bahamas Telecom, that was a very different device list to when we're doing work in the UK or the US. So typically it's on that basis, and of course we keep the device, but once the list is maintained at a percentage of the market, and obviously through analytics we can see for specific apps what that looks like, and then as new devices come to market, typically they'll push another one off the list, and that's generally how we do it.
Well, they have to at some point, don't they?
Yeah.
I suppose unless you get additive advices, like a watch is kind of an additive advice, right? The
Yes.
device, although the percentage is still 100.
Yeah, but yeah, they still but they still go obsolete, right? So at some point, Apple stops supporting them. That's the other side of things that we have to be quite strict on. Is you need to ensure that everyone's up to date on whatever device they're using, which is a bit easier on Apple than it is on Android. But if you start trying to support older devices on older versions of the operating system and new releases, you very quickly get yourself into a pickle, let's say. So typically we'll support up to whatever Apple's supporting in its latest OS releases, caveated with the fact if there's something in the market that's still popular and used by users, then we'll support that too.
All right, let's get on to the future. So what was I going to ask? Well, so I was going to ask about accessibility, actually. You mentioned it earlier. So lots of progress is being made on accessibility, and certainly accessibility is being discussed more than ever before. I mean, but based on my survey of what I hear people talking about, which perhaps not scientific, but I definitely feel that 20 years ago it was almost not a consideration, and everything has really ramped up to be for accessibility to be part of development teams' processes, which is fantastic. However, I want to ask the question: like, is accessibility getting better or worse? Like, are devices more accessible now than they have been in the past?
Yeah, another great question. I think I need to be honest here as well. I think we as a company could be doing more around this as well. I don't like to jump on the sort of preaching bandwagon and pretend that everything we do is perfect, but I do think we have a unique, more of an opportunity within mobile because of that walled garden type piece. Because we're building OSs on top. Sorry, we're building on top of OS frameworks. We get a lot of the accessibility from a technical perspective for free. If we do things properly, if we build using native interface elements, if we make sure we're populating the sort of metadata that powers some of the accessibility tools, we don't need to code in magnifying widgets or voiceover text or so on, and particularly that's true in web, but web's a lot more difficult because it's so unstructured and we have to start conforming to conventions and tagging and so on. With native development, because we're building in a more structured manner using tools and processes and widgets and components and so on that have been defined by the OS. If we use them in the correct manner, we get a lot of the accessibility features come for free, and I think that's testament to Google and Apple sort of baking that in at their level. That means we can all leverage that as app developers and with very little effort. So I think yes, I'm not the person to ask because fortunately I don't have any accessibility requirements, but I would hope that if you spoke to someone who did, they would say that yes, the apps are moving in the right direction. Is that because app developers are more aware and going out of their way to ensure accessibility beyond usability? I don't know. I know certainly that those with big budgets and larger institutions probably do. But it's something that internally we've started adding an accessibility check to all of our builds and to all of our releases. And but it's one of those things that we acknowledge we need to do better on, because I think it needs to go beyond what the OS sort of developers and proponents are pushing, but go into the way we build things ourselves internally and all the tech that goes on top of that. And it does extend beyond usability. It's not just about user interface and so on. There's a lot more to it than that.
Yeah, I think accessibility very often improves usability, but not necessarily vice versa. Or like usability in the mainstream case doesn't necessarily improve.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, and accessibility, by almost by its definition, it's not a lot about how it looks or even a lot about how it works. It's how the information or the data can be given to the user in a means by which that they can interpret it and act on it, and that gets beyond the conventional realm, I think, of just interface design and so on. So it's a really interesting space. I do think it's getting better, but I do think it's something we all need to work on, or certainly we do. Shouldn't speak for others.
I also really liked what you said about developers need to have it as part of their process rather than just using the bits that come for free. And that made me think of my kind of favourite development fact is that it's all about using your brain. It's all about individual developers using their brains to solve problems. And I think as soon as anything gets too tick boxy or formulaic in software development, you're losing that real key critical value of what a software developer is. But that's just my little soapbox.
No, you're absolutely right. Yeah, there's more to being a software developer now than writing great code that passes the test, isn't there? And I think that's a great example of where the very best engineers can distinguish themselves from from others. It's a great example.
Right, let's take a couple of quick questions from the audience. So, with the increasing hardware storage performance capabilities of mobile devices, will they become more fat client in the future, reducing traffic strain on cloud services? The old, which is going to be constrained? The storage here or the bandwidth getting it across?
I'm not seeing that yet, is what I'd say. I'd say with 5G and with the bandwidth and so on, and speed of response, and thinking about, as I say, some of our challenges are more around the size of app downloads rather than anything else. I'm seeing it carrying on its current trend at the moment. Again, I'm sure that there's some use cases where, especially with the sort of processing power we're getting access to now with the new M1, M2 chips. Have they announced that? That's pretty soon, I think, if they haven't. And Apple and Google doing the same. I think there's certainly some on-device computational stuff around, particularly in the sort of AR, XR space that we're just starting to see that we might see brought back to the client. Siri is a good question. That kind of voice analysis stuff. Can the new M2 chips, are they going to be able to do that locally? So possibly, but my gut feel is that we'll see it all continue to move to the cloud, and we'll just get quicker, slicker interfaces, and it'll be very specific components of the application that remain on the device.
Yeah, it's very interesting, isn't it? Is it driven? Are these kind of changes driven by opportunity? For example, you've got a better chip. Or are they driven by scarcity and cost? And I have a feeling that the drivers are more scarcity rather than opportunity.
Yeah,
but
that's a philosophical question. Yeah. We've swung. Yeah, my. If you ask me, what will the driver be for things not going more cloud-based? I would lean towards privacy and not shipping data off the device to be processed somewhere else and brought back. That's why I was thinking about Siri and so on. It's a great question, and probably the topic for another talk where I could attend as a listener rather than a speaker, because I'm not sure I've got the answer. But that would be my gut feel as to where we'll be seeing things happen on device, and that leans into any exchange of personal data or location or whatever that then requires processing. So voice commands or ARX or that kind of bit. Maybe that's where we'll be using that increased power. But it is, it's interesting. Once we get these bigger batteries and these faster chips, and within 3 years, the battery life's constrained again, and the apps are starting to run slow. We just take advantage of it with translucent displays or other cool stuff, right? You didn't used to have tabs in Safari. Then you had tabs, but they couldn't run JavaScript or do any asynchronous stuff in the background. Now people have got, certainly if my wife's learning to go by, hundreds of tabs open, and they're all running at once. And you don't look at Safari and think that app has come along, particularly in the past 10 years. I mean, you might, but actually under the hood, it's doing a lot more than it used to. And that's all powered by battery life and processors and so on. So I think app developers will find a way to use the resources that are thrown at them, I suspect.
To an unlimited degree, I would imagine. Right, great. We've got another question. It's quite a long question, so I'm going to read it out and then I will double check that I understand what it means. So, hardware has been almost the same ever since smartphones started. Obviously, the processing power has increased, but when would we see a big leap from our current hardware to a more sophisticated one, where the phone can examine and process different elements in our surroundings, can replace 90% of the gadgets that we use, or even can get a different form factor, etc., etc. So fully onto the future here now.
Probably a bit too far. We've swung. I must admit, I'm not a futurist in the sense that I'm looking at what's going on at the research level and so on. So my knowledge of things like quantum computing and that kind of thing are probably limited. I'm not in a place to comment. I think the form factor question is a really interesting one. We saw Google Glass whenever that was. That must have been 10 years ago or so now, mustn't it? No one's quite figured out yet with the current limitations on technology how we get that truly augmented experience beyond using the phone device. I honestly don't know when and what that will be. We can look to sci-fi for some inspiration, can't we, around implants and things like that. But we're certainly outside of my area of expertise when we get there. I think it's what this question does make me reflect is already, even with just this, how many things it is gradually replacing. There's people now who certainly don't carry cash, don't take their wallet out of home. If you're really into the sort of home kit and smart home stuff, or that's your thermostat, keys, everything going. So already in this form factor, it's replacing a lot. I'm old school. I like tablets too. So I look at an iPad, which I'm on now. I think, well, that's replaced a desktop PC and a laptop for me now in my use case. So it's remarkable how much it's already doing. Passports, you can see a lot of things going just into this form factor. It's pretty exciting to think about whatever the next big step is, what that will be and what that will enable.
That reminds me that when I first got a mobile phone, like a smartphone, I remember like my criteria for getting a smartphone was that it could replace everything in my handbag. And wow. I mean, I had a very limited number of things in my handbag, but like A to Z, diary. I can't remember anything else now. Keys is the one thing.
Post-it
I'm a little
note,
bit
maybe.
disappointed. Bit disappointed that I can't yet use my phone to open all the doors. I've got an increasing number of like tags, which I feel surely someone could have coded onto my phone. But anyway,
it's bonkers, isn't it? Like I think keys. Like we still use irregularly shaped pieces of metal to decide whether we can access places. Like it's madness. But yeah, I guess it's one of those. If it works, don't fix it. Break whatever it is.
So
not broken, don't fix it. Yeah.
All right, so we're coming towards the end. We've got about 15 minutes left. Well, maybe about 10 minutes, to be honest, to give us time for a little wrap up. So, I mean, what I'd love to ask to finish, and I would encourage anyone who has a question, you kind of really need to ask it now, because otherwise we'll run out of time. But what is the future, in your opinion, Rob? And what are the opportunities that are worth focusing on as we go forward?
I think that in my role as an agency owner advising clients, I'm looking at a sort of 5 to 10 year time frame in terms of what do you need to be doing now to make sure you're on the crest of the right wave. And I think on that sort of scope, we've covered a lot of it. So I think about put mobile first, and by that I mean don't see mobile as an opportunity to expand what you currently offer into a new audience on a new device. Flip it round and think about the mobile first, and think you've got a device in someone's pockets, and you can access accelerometer data, location data, you can access their calendar, you can, all with permission, I should add. I'm not suggesting we snoop on these things, but we have unique opportunities on a device, and how can we use that to change how we do business, how we interact, how we serve the customer. So the telematics example I gave is perhaps a pertinent one. So people might be aware, learner drivers now can opt to have a black box policy where there's a box in their car that monitors how they drive, and if they drive safely, they get reductions in their car insurance premiums, they get free coffees and all sorts like that. And that uses a device, a black box, the GPS and a server and so on. The company we're working with, in fairness, they took this mobile first approach. So what they could have done, and indeed they did originally, was have a little dashboard app that told the user, here's where you drove well, here's where you didn't, here's how you should improve. What they're looking at now is deploying, and it's actively being used, is telematics solutions that just uses the phone and replaces the need for the black box, which is cheaper, easier. It uses Bluetooth to fire up, and it's a mobile first solution that goes beyond simply giving data to people in their pocket, but using the phone for what it is. And I think there are opportunities across all businesses to do that, to take that approach. The other thing I'd be encouraging people to think about is, when you think about a mobile app, think beyond just an app on a phone or an iPad. They have significant disadvantages, and most of the customers who come to us asking for an app, we actually tell them that the app's probably not the right solution, particularly the onboarding challenge versus a web solution, wherein with the web you click a link and bang, you're there. With an app, you click a link to go to an app store, you then have to click download, remember your password or scan your face or your thumb, wait a bit till it goes, and if you've not wandered off, you then have to go to your home screen, find the app, click it, open it. It's that whole journey. It is a real pain and requires a real exchange of value to convince a customer to not only do it once, but almost more importantly, come back and do it next week or next month or next year. And so I think unless you've got a very compelling reason for the customer to do that, an app in that format is a challenging proposition. And it works in the cases of Amazon or Netflix because people are coming, they're already customers and they're looking for an easier experience. But for onboarding new customers, it's not great. So what does the future look like? I mean, app clips of I've just seen the question pop up. I'll preempt this one. So app clips haven't really found their place yet, but PWAs or WPAs and opportunities like that. When we're talking about mobile apps now, we're not generally looking at it in terms of, right, we'll build you an APK or an IPA file and drop it into an app store. You need to be thinking about, okay, customer is at this point, right, we'll use a PWA for the first interaction and they'll get the QR code they need to access the museum. But then once they're through the museum, we'll use Bluetooth to trigger a request to download the app. And once they're in, we'll be able to use the benefits that an app can bring, such as the Bluetooth tracking or streaming media from a local server for an audio tour. Or I'm sort of coming up with this off the top of my head. But it's not just the app. You've got to think about the journey start to end. And that might be app clips, it might be PWAs, it might be using smart speakers for the first interactions. A great example might be, it's actually a sister, another agency up in Manchester, flight tracking. When's my flight going to land? Well, we could, and I won't name check the airport, but the airport decided our user's going to go to the app store and download their app just to see when the plane that they're expecting to land. Or do we just build a simple smart speaker integration and you just ask the question and you get told, right? So it's things like that. And I think in our role as consultants and advisors to clients, it's a little bit different to technology platform companies, but think about the opportunity of mobile beyond just the native compiled app and if we build it, they will come type mentality. I think we need to be smarter and savvier. And we've touched on CarPlay, watches, smart speakers. There are a myriad others that all form this kind of mobile solution. The idea that people can interact with your service when or wherever they are, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's from the App Store and sat as an icon on a desktop. And when I look forward, that they're the conversations that we're having for the next, as I say, that sort of 3 to 5 year time frame. Waffled a bit at you there, Zoe.
No, that's fantastic, and definitely, I've definitely found myself nodding because you hit on this. I've got like a whole folder on my phone of like the Ryanair app, the BA app, all these apps I've used once because, like you say, I needed to look at my flight time for that one flight, and then I used a different airline next time. It's like not a user-centric solution at all.
No, and they so the pass bit's easy with Wallet and Passbook and so on. So there are easier ways to get you what you need right there and then better ways to get you from there to use the app and come back on your terms and with a fair exchange of value. And I think that's the interesting opportunity for us moving forward.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Rob. Let me just check everything I need to say now. You can connect with Rob if you enjoyed listening to Rob answer questions as much as I have. You can connect with him on the links that I am now going to share in the chat. I'd also like to mention that CTO Craft is running a survey in partnership with Indiespring, which is related to today's event. So it'd be great if you could fill out the survey too. I'm also going to put that into the chat. Then, all right, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to, I haven't worked out, I've done a couple of these, but I've not worked out how to post things in the chat while also talking.
That's good.
I feel like I should be able to seamlessly, post in the chat while I am. So here's me as well. If anyone wants to connect to me, I love meeting people. There you go. And I need my, okay. So that's me. And here, finally, is the survey.
Yeah, and we'd be super grateful if people would. We're an agency with a limited number of clients, so our view of particularly CTO's approach to mobile and so on is limited to the conversations that we have with them and with others. So it's all anonymous. We're just keen to understand the thoughts of our peers, really.
Brilliant. So the very final thing I need to say is that next Friday at 12:30 there is another CTO Craft Bytes, and this one is on roadmaps. Well, the title is Roadmaps and OKRs Don't Have to Suck. So I'm sure there'll be plenty of people tuning into this one. Here's the link. I've now put the link for that in the chat as well. So I think that is everything that I need to tell you before we leave you. We've just got another question. Shall I see if we've got time to answer it quickly?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, so it's a little bit actually from Andrew Speakman. Thank you, Andrew. It's a little bit the topic that you were just addressing at the end there, Rob. So Andrew says, I find a lot of clients have a preconceived idea that they need an app developed, almost to the point of it being a vanity thing. So what are the strong client-facing arguments against take? How do you talk them out of it, Rob?
Often a price is enough, if I'm being really blunt. I think go through that conversation of, I mean, genuinely, if they've got the money and they want it, then there's an argument to say, well, okay, if it really does mean something to your organisation to have it, then go for it. But I agree with Andrew. A lot of it is vanity. It's we need an app, and honestly, over 50% of the requests we get for an app are met with, you really don't need an app for this, and it's not worth the investment. So it's generally around the initial cost, but also what I think people underestimate with mobile is the ongoing cost. We're not at a place with mobile yet that you can launch it and leave it, and it might degrade a little bit around the edges, but generally it'll hold together. It will fall apart quite quickly as new devices hit the market, as Apple change the rules, as new Swift 4 becomes the popular. It's not long before it's removed. So it's the ongoing investment as well, and you can pretty quickly put together a rational argument around, if the upfront cost is 6 figures, the ongoing maintenance cost is 4 or 5 figures a month at least. How does that stack against increased top line? Maybe that's a salesman's answer, but I think that's normally the client arrives at the decision almost themselves after that kind of a discussion.
And maybe even also like a next best alternative. Like if you're spending 6 figures, what else could you have had?
Exactly. A PWA. What if you just implemented a better mobile experience through your web, introduce some PWA features like offline caching and notifications on Android? There's loads you can do with that, and you're not then maintaining what would then be 3 code bases: Apple, Android, and your web. You're maintaining one. You've still got one database from a security standpoint. You've got one application to audit. Accessibility. So yeah, exactly. I think you're right, Zoe.
Well, thank you so much, Rob. Thanks everyone for watching, joining in for so many questions. It's been a super interactive chat, and I've really enjoyed that.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, see you all next week.
Bye.
Bye.